The morning started like any other at Kensington Palace. William woke up early, as he always did, and looked out the window at the grey London sky. Kate was already awake, sitting quietly with a cup of tea. They didn't need to say much to each other. After so many years together, they could feel what the other person was thinking. Today was different, though. Today was the day they had been dreading for weeks. The news had come suddenly, like a cold wind that changes everything in a moment. Someone very close to the royal family had passed away. It wasn't announced to the public yet, but William and Kate knew they would soon have to face the cameras and the crowds. Kate put down her teacup and walked over to William. She placed her hand on his shoulder. He turned to look at her, and she could see the sadness in his eyes. William was always the strong one in public, the one who kept his emotions hidden behind a calm face. But here, in their private rooms, he didn't have to pretend. The children were still asleep. George, Charlotte, and Louis had no idea what was coming. How do you explain loss to young children? How do you help them understand that someone they loved won't be there anymore? These were the questions that kept Kate awake at night. William stood up and straightened his jacket. He looked at himself in the mirror and took a deep breath. Kate watched him transform from a grieving family member into the future king. It was something she had seen many times before, but today it felt different. Today the weight seemed heavier. Outside the palace, staff members moved quietly through the hallways. Everyone knew something was wrong. The usual cheerful chatter was replaced with whispers and careful steps. Security guards stood at their posts with more serious faces than usual. Even the palace seemed to be mourning. Kate got dressed in a simple black outfit. She chose her jewelry carefully, picking pieces that were elegant but not too flashy. This wasn't a day for showing off. This was a day for dignity and respect. She looked at herself in the mirror and practiced her public smile, the one she would need to wear for the cameras. William came back into the room holding a folder of papers. These were the schedules and plans for the day. There would be meetings, phone calls, and eventually a public appearance. The royal family had protocols for everything, even grief, but protocols couldn't take away the pain. They sat down together to have breakfast with the children. George noticed right away that something was wrong. He was old enough now to pick up on the mood in a room. Charlotte and Louis were more focused on their food, but they kept looking up at their parents with curious eyes. William tried to explain things in a way the children could understand. He used simple words and a gentle voice. Kate added details here and there, making sure the children knew it was okay to feel sad. George asked if they could still go to the park later. William and Kate looked at each other, and Kate said maybe tomorrow would be better. After breakfast, the children went off with their nanny. William and Kate stood in the hallway, knowing what came next. They had to prepare for the public announcement. The communications team was already working on the statement that would be released to the press. William and Kate would need to review it and approve it. In the small office where they worked on royal duties, papers were spread across the desk. William read through the statement slowly, changing a word here and there. Kate looked over his shoulder, suggesting softer phrases that would comfort people who were grieving too. They worked together like they always did as a team. The palace secretary knocked on the door. It was time for the phone calls. William would need to speak to other members of the royal family, government officials, and close friends. Each conversation would be difficult in its own way. Kate sat beside him as he made the first call, her presence giving him strength. Hours passed like this, with one task flowing into another. There were decisions to be made about funeral arrangements, public statements, and family gatherings. William and Kate moved through it all with practiced grace, but inside they were both struggling with their own emotions. Finally, there was a moment of quiet. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, sending a beam of light through the office window. Kate walked over and stood in that light, closing her eyes for just a second. William watched her and felt grateful. No matter how hard things got, she was always there beside him. They both knew that soon they would have to step outside and face the world. The cameras would be watching every movement, every expression, every gesture. People would analyze how they walked, how they stood, and how they looked at each other. It was the price of being royal, but it never got easier. Kate turned to William and asked if he was ready. He nodded slowly. They both understood that this moment would be remembered. Royal history was full of these moments when personal grief became public spectacle. But they also knew they had each other, and that made all the difference. As they prepared to leave the office, William reached for Kate's hand. She squeezed back, a silent message of support and love. They walked toward the door together, their steps in sync, ready to face whatever came next. The quiet goodbye they were about to say would soon become something bigger, something that people would talk about for years to come. The palace walls held centuries of royal history. Kings and queens had walked these same hallways during their own times of sorrow. William and Kate were now part of that long tradition, carrying on with dignity even when their hearts were breaking. The world was waiting outside, and they were about to show everyone what true poise in sorrow really looked like. The car was waiting in the private courtyard. William and Kate walked down the palace stairs, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Security personnel stood at attention, their faces showing respect for the difficult moment. The driver opened the door and Kate slid into the back seat first, followed by William. As the car pulled away from Kensington Palace, they watched London pass by through the tinted windows. People on the streets had no idea who was in the car or where they were going. For a few minutes, William and Kate could be almost invisible, just two people dealing with loss like anyone else would. Kate looked down at her hands. She had chosen to wear a pair of pearl earrings that had been a gift years ago. Small details like this mattered today. Everything they wore, every choice they made, would be noticed and discussed. She wanted to get it right, to honor the memory of the person they had lost while also representing the royal family with dignity. William stared out the window, his jaw tight. Kate knew that look. He was holding back emotions, keeping himself together for what was ahead. She wanted to tell him it was okay to feel sad, that he didn't always have to be strong, but she also understood the pressure he felt. As the future king, people expected him to be a rock, steady and unshakable. The car turned onto a main road, and suddenly there were more people around. Some looked at the official vehicle with curiosity, trying to see through the dark windows. William and Kate sat back a little, maintaining their privacy for as long as possible. These last few moments of quiet were precious. Kate's phone buzzed with a message from the palace. The statement had been released to the press. Within seconds, it would be all over the news. People around the world would be reading about their loss, sharing their opinions and watching for any sign of the royal couple. Kate showed the message to William, and he nodded slowly. There was no going back now. They arrived at their destination, a private location where close family and friends had gathered. This was before the public appearance, a time for the family to be together away from cameras and reporters. William and Kate knew this would be emotional, seeing everyone's grief reflected in the faces of people they loved. As they stepped out of the car, other family members were already there. There were quiet greetings, gentle hugs, and tears that couldn't be held back. William embraced his relatives, his face showing the pain he had been hiding. Kate moved through the group, offering comfort to those who needed it, even though her own heart was heavy. Inside the building, the atmosphere was thick with sadness. People spoke in low voices, sharing memories and stories about the person they had lost. William stood in a corner, listening to an elderly relative tell a story from years ago. Kate watched him from across the room, seeing the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking. A young cousin approached Kate, eyes red from crying. Kate knelt down to be at eye level and spoke softly, offering words of comfort. This was something she had learned to do well over the years. Being royal wasn't just about wearing nice clothes and attending fancy events. It was about being there for people during the hardest moments of their lives. After some time, William and Kate found a quiet corner to stand together. They didn't say much, just stood side by side, drawing strength from each other's presence. William looked at his watch. Soon they would need to leave for the public appearance. The private mourning would have to pause while they performed their royal duties. Kate touched William's arm gently. She wanted to make sure he was okay, that he could handle what was coming next. He looked at her and gave a small, sad smile. They had been through difficult times before. They had faced public scrutiny, media pressure, and personal challenges. But this felt different. This was about saying goodbye to someone important and having to do it in front of the whole world. The palace aide approached them quietly. It was time to go. William and Kate said their goodbyes to the family members, promising to return later. As they walked back to the car, Kate noticed how William's posture had changed. He was standing taller now, his face becoming more composed. The public mask was sliding back into place. During the drive to the public location, they went over the plan one more time. They would arrive, walk a specific route, stop to view the flowers and tributes that people had left, and then speak briefly to officials. Every step was choreographed, every moment planned, but both of them knew that real emotion couldn't be scripted. Kate checked her appearance in a small compact mirror. Her makeup was still in place, but she could see the tiredness around her eyes. William noticed her checking and reminded her that she looked fine, that she always did. She smiled at him, grateful for his support even when he was dealing with his own pain. The car slowed down as they approached their destination. Through the windows, they could see crowds of people gathered behind barriers. There were flowers everywhere, tributes and messages from people who wanted to show their respect. Television crews had their cameras ready. Reporters were speaking into microphones and photographers were adjusting their lenses. Kate felt her stomach tighten. This was it. In a few moments they would step out into that scene, and the whole world would be watching. Every tear, every gesture, every look they shared would be captured and analyzed. She took a deep breath and reached for William's hand one more time. William squeezed her hand back. They looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. They could do this. They had to do this, not just because it was their duty as members of the royal family, but because it was the right way to honor the person they had lost. The car came to a complete stop. Security personnel positioned themselves around the vehicle. The driver waited for the signal before opening the door. William and Kate sat for just one more second, gathering their strength, preparing their hearts for what came next. This was the moment when private grief would become public mourning. This was when William and Kate would show the world what it meant to carry on with grace even when everything inside you wants to fall apart. The door handle clicked and a sliver of daylight appeared as the door began to open. The door opened fully and the sounds of the crowd rushed in. William stepped out first, his face calm and composed despite the cameras flashing from every direction. He turned and offered his hand to Kate, helping her out of the car with the gentle care that had become their signature over the years. Kate emerged into the afternoon light and immediately felt the weight of 1,000 eyes watching her every move. The crowd was enormous, stretching far beyond what they had expected. People of all ages stood behind the barriers, some crying, some holding flowers, all wanting to be part of this moment in history. They stood together for a moment, taking in the scene before them. Mountains of flowers covered the ground, creating a carpet of colors against the gray pavement. There were photographs, handwritten notes, stuffed animals, and candles. Each item represented someone's grief, someone's way of saying goodbye. The outpouring of love was overwhelming. William took the first step forward and Kate walked beside him, matching his pace perfectly. They moved slowly with dignity, their expressions showing the sorrow they felt inside. The crowd fell silent as they approached, a respectful hush replacing the earlier murmurs and conversations. Kate noticed an elderly woman in the front row, tears streaming down her face. Their eyes met for just a second, and Kate gave a small, sad nod of acknowledgement. That simple gesture said everything words could not express. We are all grieving together. We all feel this loss. William stopped at a particular display of flowers that caught his attention. Someone had arranged white roses in a beautiful pattern, with a heartfelt message attached. He bent down slowly, reading the words written there. Kate stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his back, a gesture of support that the cameras captured but that came from genuine love. Not performance. They continued walking, stopping every few steps to look at the tributes people had left. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, held out a single daisy toward Kate. Her mother tried to pull her back, but Kate smiled gently and accepted the flower. She said something soft to the child, words that only they could hear, and the little girl's face lit up despite the sadness of the day. William was speaking to an official now, someone who was explaining the arrangements that had been made. Kate could see the strain on his face, the way he was working hard to maintain his composure. She knew him well enough to see past the public mask to the man underneath who was hurting. Photographers moved around them, trying to capture the perfect shot. The clicking of cameras was constant, like a strange soundtrack to their grief. Kate had learned long ago to tune out those sounds, to focus on the moment rather than the spectacle being made of it. But today it felt more intrusive than usual. They reached a specific spot where they had been asked to pause. This was where the main cameras were positioned, where the images that would appear in tomorrow's newspapers would be taken. William and Kate stood together, looking at the sea of flowers and tributes spread before them. Neither spoke, but their body language said everything. Kate felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She blinked them back, not wanting to break down completely in front of everyone. But one tear escaped, rolling slowly down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away quickly like she might have years ago when she was newer to royal life. Instead, she let it fall, an honest expression of the sadness she felt. William saw the tear and moved slightly closer to Kate, their shoulders touching. It was a small movement, but it showed their unity, their strength in being together. The photographers captured that moment, the image of them standing side by side, sharing their grief with dignity and grace. A breeze picked up, rustling through the flowers and making some of the paper notes flutter. Kate's hair moved slightly and she reached up to tuck it behind her ear. Even that simple gesture was elegant, natural. She had become so comfortable in her role as a royal, but she never lost her authentic self in the process. They began walking again, this time toward a group of officials and clergy members who were waiting to speak with them. William shook hands, exchanged quiet words, his royal training evident in every interaction. Kate did the same, her warm manner putting people at ease even in this difficult situation. An older gentleman approached them, someone who had known the person they had lost very well. He spoke to William about memories they shared, and Kate watched as William's carefully controlled expression flickered with real emotion. She moved closer, her presence a reminder that he wasn't alone in this. The crowd behind the barriers began to call out messages of support. "We love you," someone shouted. "Stay strong," called another voice. William and Kate couldn't respond individually to these calls, but they both turned slightly toward the crowd, acknowledging the kindness being offered to them. Kate noticed a banner that someone held up with a beautiful message written on it. She pointed it out to William, and he nodded, seeing it too. These small moments of connection with the public were important. They reminded William and Kate that they weren't just performing a duty, but sharing a genuine experience with people who cared. Time seemed to move both quickly and slowly. Minutes felt like hours, yet somehow the whole appearance was passing in what felt like seconds. William and Kate continued their walkabout, stopping to speak with different people, viewing more tributes, always maintaining that perfect balance of being accessible yet dignified. Kate's feet were starting to hurt in her heels, but she didn't let it show. William's voice was getting slightly rough from speaking to so many people, but he kept going. They were both professionals, trained for years to handle situations exactly like this. But they were also human beings dealing with real loss. As they prepared to move to the next section of their appearance, Kate reached out and briefly took William's hand. It was just for a second, a quick squeeze of support, but the cameras caught it. That image would become one of the most talked about from the entire day, a symbol of their partnership and love. They walked toward the car, knowing their public appearance was nearly complete. But even as they moved away, they kept turning back to acknowledge the crowds, to show appreciation for everyone who had come out to pay respects. This wasn't just about duty anymore. It was about shared humanity, about people coming together in grief. Just as they were about to reach the car, something unexpected happened. A young boy no more than 5 years old somehow slipped past the barriers. He was clutching a drawing he had made, tears on his cheeks, running toward William and Kate with pure, unfiltered emotion. Security immediately moved to intercept the child, but William raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He knelt down on the pavement, lowering himself to the boy's level. Kate watched, her heart aching at the tenderness of the moment. This wasn't in the schedule. This wasn't planned. This was simply William being human. The little boy thrust the drawing toward William, his small hands shaking. It was a picture drawn in crayon, showing stick figures that clearly represented the royal family. William took it carefully, studying the drawing with genuine interest. He said something to the boy, and the child nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Kate moved closer, bending down beside William. She smiled at the boy, that warm, motherly smile that had endeared her to millions of people around the world. The boy looked at her with wide eyes, suddenly shy. Kate asked him a question, and he whispered something in response, so quietly that only she and William could hear. The crowd had fallen completely silent, watching this unscripted moment unfold. Cameras were clicking furiously, but somehow the noise seemed distant, unimportant compared to what was happening. This was the moment that protocol couldn't control, that royal training couldn't prepare for. This was real life breaking through all the carefully maintained barriers. William stood up slowly, still holding the child's drawing. The boy's mother had appeared now, red-faced and apologetic, trying to pull her son back. But Kate reached out and touched the woman's arm, saying something that made the tension leave her shoulders. The mother nodded, tears streaming down her face, grateful for the understanding being shown. The little boy reached up suddenly and hugged William's legs. For a second, William froze, clearly not expecting the gesture. Then his face softened completely, and he placed his hand gently on the child's head. It was such a simple act, but it said so much about who William was beneath the royal title and the public persona. Kate felt her own tears returning, but this time she didn't try to hide them. She watched William with the child, and something inside her broke open. All the careful control, all the practiced composure, suddenly seemed less important than this moment of pure, honest connection. William carefully extracted himself from the boy's hug and handed the drawing to an aide, asking them to keep it safe. He looked at the child one more time and said something that made the boy smile despite his tears. Then he stood up, and the mother guided her son back toward the crowd, the boy looking back over his shoulder at William and Kate with wonder in his eyes. That moment changed everything. What had been a solemn, controlled appearance suddenly felt different. William and Kate turned back to the crowd, and instead of moving toward the car, they spontaneously decided to walk along the barrier, speaking to more people, making more connections. An elderly man reached out his hand, and William shook it firmly. The man said something about serving in the military, about duty and honor, and William listened with complete attention. Kate was a few steps away, speaking to a group of young women who were crying openly. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply listened, nodded, and shared in their grief. A teenager asked Kate for a hug, and after a moment's hesitation, Kate agreed. It wasn't something royals typically did, but today wasn't a typical day. The girl embraced Kate tightly, and when they separated, both had tears in their eyes. The girl thanked Kate, saying it meant everything, and Kate squeezed her hand in response. William had moved further down the barrier, and Kate hurried to catch up with him. They exchanged a look, a silent agreement that they were doing the right thing, even if it meant abandoning the schedule and the carefully laid plans. Sometimes being royal meant following the rules. Sometimes it meant knowing when to break them. More people called out to them, more hands reached over the barrier, more stories were shared. William and Kate moved through it all with patience and grace, giving time to each person, making each individual feel seen and heard. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, but also somehow healing. A woman told Kate that seeing them today had helped her deal with her own loss from years ago. Kate listened to the whole story, never once checking her watch or looking away. When the woman finished, Kate said something that made her smile through her tears. These conversations weren't being recorded by microphones. They were private moments happening in a very public space. William was speaking to a group of military veterans now, men and women who had served their country and come to pay their respects. He knew many of them by name from previous events. They spoke about service, about dedication, about the person they had all lost. William's face showed his respect for these people, his understanding of sacrifice. Kate noticed that William's earlier tension had eased. The spontaneous decision to extend their time with the public seemed to be helping him process his grief. Sometimes doing something meaningful for others was the best way to handle your own pain. Kate understood that, and she was proud of the choice they had made together. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting a golden light over everything, William and Kate finally began moving back toward the car. But they did it slowly, still stopping, still connecting, still being present with the people who had come out to support them and to mourn together. Kate looked at all the flowers one more time, at the messages and tributes, at the faces in the crowd. She thought about how grief could bring people together, how loss could remind everyone of what really mattered in life. Today had started with such dread, such worry about getting everything right, but it had become something much more meaningful than a perfect royal appearance. William took Kate's hand again as they approached the car, and this time he didn't let go quickly. They walked the last few steps hand in hand, a couple dealing with grief, a team facing life's hardest moments together. The cameras captured it all, but for once William and Kate weren't thinking about the cameras. They reached the car door, and William helped Kate inside before sliding in beside her. As the door closed, shutting out the noise and the crowds, they sat back against the seats and took deep breaths. Neither spoke for a long moment. They didn't need to. They had just experienced something that would stay with them forever. The car pulled away slowly, security vehicles following close behind. William and Kate sat in silence for the first few minutes, both processing what had just happened. Kate's hand was still in William's, and neither made a move to let go. Outside the window, they could see people still standing by the barriers, still holding their tributes, still wiping away tears. Kate finally spoke, her voice quiet and a little shaky. She said something about the little boy with the drawing, about how unexpected and touching that moment had been. William nodded, admitting that he had acted on instinct, not protocol. He had seen a child in pain and simply responded as a father would, not as a future king. They talked about the decision they had made to extend their time with the crowd. It had felt right in the moment, but now they both wondered what the palace officials would say. They had abandoned the schedule, ignored the timing, done things their own way. Kate said she didn't regret it, and William agreed completely. As the car moved through the London streets, both of them felt the exhaustion settling in. It wasn't just physical tiredness, though. Their feet hurt and their faces ached from maintaining composure. It was emotional exhaustion, the kind that comes from keeping yourself together when everything inside wants to fall apart. William's phone buzzed with messages. He glanced at it briefly and saw texts from family members who had been watching the coverage on television. They were supportive, understanding, proud of how William and Kate had handled themselves. He showed some of the messages to Kate, and she smiled weakly. Grateful for the family's support, Kate thought about her own parents, about how they would have watched every moment, worried about her but also proud. Being royal had changed her life in so many ways, but it hadn't changed who she was at her core. She was still the same person who valued family, kindness, and genuine connection with others. The car approached Kensington Palace, and both William and Kate felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because they could finally let down their guard, stop performing for the cameras, and just be themselves. Sadness because returning to the palace meant facing reality again, dealing with the loss without the distraction of public duties. They arrived at the private entrance, and staff members were waiting to greet them. The staff had watched the coverage too, and their faces showed respect and compassion. One of the older servants, who had been with the family for decades, simply nodded at William and Kate as they passed. Sometimes silence said more than words ever could. Inside their private quarters, William immediately loosened his tie and sat down heavily on the sofa. Kate kicked off her heels and sat beside him, curling her legs underneath her. They sat like that for a while, just being close, not needing to say anything. The silence was comfortable, healing in its own way. Kate thought about all the faces she had seen today, all the stories people had shared. Each person had their own connection to the loss they were all experiencing. Some had met the deceased person, others just admired them from afar, but everyone felt the impact of their absence. It reminded Kate that influence could extend far beyond what anyone realized while they were alive. William got up and walked to the window, looking out at the palace gardens. The evening light was beautiful, peaceful. He thought about duty and responsibility, about what it meant to be royal in the modern world. Today had taught him something important. Protocol and tradition had their place, but humanity should always come first. Kate joined him at the window, slipping her arm through his. They stood together, watching the light fade, both lost in their own thoughts but comforted by each other's presence. Kate mentioned how proud she was of him, of how he had handled the little boy, of how he had made the choice to spend more time with the grieving public. William admitted that he hadn't felt like himself for weeks, weighed down by the pressure of handling grief in the public eye. But today, somehow, connecting with ordinary people going through the same emotions had helped. It reminded him that beneath all the titles and protocols, everyone experiences loss the same way. Their conversation turned to the children. George, Charlotte, and Louis would need to be told more about what was happening, about what today had meant. William and Kate discussed how to talk to them, how to help them understand loss while also maintaining their innocence and joy. It was a delicate balance, one they had thought about often as parents in the public eye. The nanny brought the children to see their parents before bedtime. George immediately noticed that his mother had been crying. He asked if she was okay, his young face full of concern. Kate assured him she was fine, that sometimes grown-ups cry when they're sad, and that was perfectly normal. Charlotte hugged Kate tightly, and Louis climbed into William's lap, sensing that his father needed comfort. After the children went to bed, William and Kate had dinner alone in their private dining room. Neither was very hungry, but they tried to eat something, knowing they needed to keep their strength up. The conversation drifted between serious topics and lighter moments, the way it often did when they were alone together. Kate brought up the media coverage, wondering what the newspapers would say tomorrow. William reminded her that they couldn't control what others wrote or said about them. All they could control was their own behavior, their own choices, and their own hearts. They had done their best today, and that had to be enough. Later that evening, William's private secretary called with an update. The public response to their appearance had been overwhelmingly positive. People were talking about the authenticity they had shown, the real emotion, the decision to break protocol and spend extra time with the crowds. The little boy with the drawing had become a symbol of the day's meaning. Kate felt validated hearing this news. They had worried about doing things differently, about stepping outside the usual boundaries. But it seemed their instincts had been right. People didn't want to see robots performing duties. They wanted to see real people dealing with real emotions in an honest way. As they prepared for bed, both William and Kate felt the weight of the day settling on their shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more duties, continued grief. But tonight they could rest, knowing they had honored the person they lost in a way that felt true to themselves. William told Kate that he couldn't have gotten through the day without her. She replied that they were a team, always had been, always would be. They had supported each other through scandals, media attacks, public scrutiny, and personal challenges. This was just one more thing they had faced together and come through stronger. Kate turned off the light and they lay in the darkness, hands clasped between them. Outside, London continued its endless rhythm. Inside Kensington Palace, two people who happened to be royal were simply trying to process their grief and find peace. The day that had started with so much dread had become something meaningful, something that would be remembered not for its perfection, but for its honesty. The morning newspapers arrived early, as they always did at Kensington Palace. William woke up before Kate and quietly went to his study to look at the coverage. He had learned long ago that it was better to know what was being said rather than avoiding it. As he spread the papers across his desk, he was struck by what he saw. The front pages all carried the same image. It was the moment when that little boy had run toward them, when William had knelt down to receive the drawing, when Kate had stood beside him with tears in her eyes. The photographs captured something raw and real, a side of the royal family that people rarely got to see. The headlines talked about humanity, about breaking protocol in the best way, about showing that royals could grieve just like everyone else. William read through several articles, surprised by the tone. For once, the media wasn't criticizing or analyzing every detail looking for flaws. Instead, they were praising the authenticity, the genuine emotion, the human connection. Kate appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, holding a cup of tea. She asked how bad it was, assuming the worst. William smiled and gestured for her to come look. As she read over his shoulder, her expression changed from worry to relief to something like pride. They had done something right, something that mattered. The phone started ringing before breakfast. Family members calling to share their thoughts. Palace officials wanting to discuss next steps. Charity organizations asking if William and Kate would consider being more involved with grief counseling initiatives. The response to their appearance had sparked something bigger than they had anticipated. Over breakfast with the children, George asked to see the picture from the newspaper. William showed him carefully, explaining what had happened, why it was important. George studied the image seriously, then asked if they could go visit the flowers that people had left. Kate and William exchanged glances. It was a lovely idea, and yes, they could do that as a family. Throughout the morning, more messages poured in from around the world. People shared their own stories of loss, thanking William and Kate for showing that it was okay to be vulnerable, okay to show emotion, okay to break from tradition when compassion demanded it. Each message reinforced that what they had done had touched people deeply. Kate spent time responding to some of the messages personally. She couldn't answer all of them, but she wanted to acknowledge the kindness being shown. Writing to people who had experienced similar losses helped her process her own grief. It reminded her that she wasn't alone in this feeling, that everyone, everywhere, dealt with these universal human experiences. William met with his private secretary to discuss the long-term implications of yesterday's events. There was talk of changing some protocols, of allowing more flexibility in royal appearances, of prioritizing genuine connection over rigid schedules. William was surprised to find the palace staff supportive of these ideas. Perhaps they too had been waiting for permission to be more human. In the afternoon, William and Kate took the children to see the tributes that had been left. They walked through the flowers holding their children's hands, reading messages, looking at drawings that children from around the country had sent. George was particularly interested in the military tributes, asking questions about service and duty. Charlotte picked up a stuffed bear that someone had left and asked if she could keep it. Kate explained that it was meant to stay there as part of the memorial, but they could come back and visit it whenever she wanted. Charlotte seemed satisfied with this answer, carefully placing the bear back exactly where she had found it. Louis, still very young, didn't fully understand what everything meant, but he sensed the solemnity of the moment. He held tight to William's hand and stayed quiet, his usual bouncing energy subdued by the atmosphere. Even at his age, he could feel that something important was happening. As they walked through the flowers, people recognized them but kept a respectful distance. There was no pressing forward, no shouting for attention. Instead, there was a shared understanding, a mutual respect. William and Kate nodded to people, smiled sadly, shared in the collective mourning without needing words. One elderly woman approached Kate carefully and asked if she could give her a small package. Inside was a handkerchief that had belonged to the woman's own grandmother, embroidered with delicate flowers. She wanted Kate to have it, saying it had gotten her through her own times of grief. Kate was touched beyond words, accepting the gift with genuine gratitude. That evening, after the children were in bed, William and Kate sat together reviewing the day's events. They talked about how this experience would shape their future work, their approach to being royal, their understanding of what really mattered. Yesterday's appearance had become a turning point, not just in public perception but in their own evolution. Kate mentioned wanting to work more with organizations that helped people deal with loss. William agreed, suggesting they could start initiatives focused on grief counseling and mental health support. These weren't just abstract ideas anymore. They had lived through something that made these causes personal and urgent. The drawing from the little boy was already framed and sitting on William's desk. He looked at it often, reminded of the moment when everything changed, when protocol gave way to humanity, when being real became more important than being perfect. That simple crayon drawing represented a shift in how William understood his role. Over the following weeks, the impact of their appearance continued to ripple outward. Mental health professionals reported more people seeking help, saying that seeing William and Kate be vulnerable had made it okay for them to seek support too. Schools started teaching children that showing emotion was strength, not weakness. The conversation around grief and loss had changed. William and Kate were invited to speak at events, to share their experience, to encourage others to embrace authenticity. They were careful not to make it about themselves, always bringing the focus back to the person they had lost and the universal experience of grief. But their willingness to be open had given others permission to do the same. The little boy who had run to William with his drawing became a part of the story, though his family carefully protected his privacy. He became a symbol of innocent emotion, of breaking through barriers, of reminding everyone that beneath titles and protocols, we're all just people trying to connect with each other. Kate often thought about that day, about the moment when everything felt like it was falling apart and somehow came together instead. She had learned that perfection wasn't the goal. Authenticity was. Being real with people, sharing genuine emotion, connecting human to human, that was what mattered. William found that he approached his royal duties differently after that day. He was less worried about every detail being exactly right and more focused on the meaning behind the actions. He asked himself not just what protocol demanded, but what his heart told him was right. Usually those two things aligned, but when they didn't, he had learned which one to follow. The legacy of that day extended far beyond just William and Kate. It changed how the royal family approached public appearances, how they dealt with difficult moments, how they connected with people. Future generations would look back at this moment as a turning point, when the royals showed they were human first and royal second. Years later, people would still talk about it. The quiet goodbye that became unforgettable. The moment when poise and sorrow showed the world what true dignity looked like. Not the stiff, cold perfection of tradition, but the warm, real emotion of people who genuinely cared, who genuinely hurt, who genuinely connected. William and Kate's relationship had always been strong, but shared grief had deepened it in ways they hadn't expected. They knew now that they could face anything together, that their partnership could withstand the pressures of public life while remaining authentic and loving. That was perhaps the greatest gift to come from their sorrow. As time passed and the immediate pain of loss eased into a gentler sadness, William and Kate continued to carry the lessons of that day with them. They had learned that breaking protocol sometimes meant honoring something more important. They had learned that showing emotion didn't make them weak, it made them human. They had learned that people didn't need perfect royals. They needed real ones. The story of William and Kate's quiet goodbye had indeed become an unforgettable moment in royal history. Not because it was perfectly executed or traditionally appropriate, but because it was honest, human, and real. In a world that often valued appearances over authenticity, they had chosen to be genuine, and that choice had made all the difference.